Calm isn't a personality trait, it's a habit, repeated so many times it eventually stops looking like effort and starts looking like who someone is. Look closely at the sharpest, steadiest people in Japan well into their 70s and 80s, and there's no single big secret behind it. There are 20 small ones, repeated every day for decades. Today, all 20. Most take under 2 minutes. None of them cost anything. And by the last one, you'll understand exactly why 20 small habits can do something no single big change ever could. 20. Finish one small thing before starting the next. Psychologists have a name for what happens when you leave a task even slightly unfinished and move on to the next one. Attention residue. Part of your mind stays behind, still turning over the thing you didn't complete, which means you're never quite fully present in whatever comes after it. It's a strange thing to have a name for, and yet almost everyone recognizes it instantly once it's pointed out, even though barely anyone thinks about it in the moment it's actually happening. Now imagine that happening a dozen times before lunch. The email started but not sent. The load of laundry still sitting, done, but not put away. The browser tab kept open because you'll come back to it later. Each one seems small on its own. Together, they're a low hum of half-finished obligations your mind keeps quietly tracking in the background. In Japanese daily life, finishing what you started before moving to the next thing isn't treated as a productivity technique. It's just the ordinary way things are done. The bowl gets rinsed, dried, and put away before anything else happens. Nobody's enforcing it. It's simply the shape of the day. The habit is almost embarrassingly small. Before you switch to the next task today, finish the one in front of you, rinse the bowl, send the email, close the loop. There's a specific quiet relief in actually finishing something completely. And once you stop leaving loose ends everywhere, you start noticing how many you'd been carrying without realizing it. This isn't about becoming rigid or refusing to ever leave anything mid-task. Some things genuinely do need to wait. It's about noticing how many things get left unfinished purely out of habit, not necessity, and closing just those. A load of laundry moved to the dryer before you sit down. A single email answered instead of left to reread 3 times later without ever replying. Each one on its own takes seconds. What they leave behind unclosed doesn't. There's a specific reason this habit belongs first on a list built around calm, sharp aging. It's the one that makes every other habit easier to keep. A mind carrying 24 unfinished loops has less room left over for a slow walk, a quiet cup, an evening reset. Clearing the small stuff isn't a separate project from the rest of this list. It's what makes the rest of the list possible to actually stick to. 19. Prepare tomorrow's essentials tonight. Every decision you make first thing in the morning draws from the same limited well of mental energy you'll need for everything else that day. What to wear, where the keys are, whether there's enough time to eat something before leaving. A small, consistent evening habit removes a surprising number of these decisions before they ever have to be made. The clothes set out, the bag by the door, the cup and the kettle already in place for tomorrow's tea. None of this is about being especially organized. It's about not spending tomorrow morning's limited attention on decisions that were just as easy to make tonight with a clearer head and no clock running. This is a genuinely small habit, and that's exactly the point. Pick 3 things tonight: clothes, bag, 1 task for tomorrow, and set them in place before bed. Tomorrow morning will feel a little more like walking into a day that's already partly underway instead of starting one from zero. There's a specific kind of calm in evening that ends this way. Not because tomorrow becomes easier in any large sense, but because a handful of small frictions have already been removed from it before it's even begun. The morning self inherits a slightly lighter load from the evening self, and that exchange, repeated night after night, is worth more than it looks like from the outside. Think of it as a small kindness passed forward from the version of you with a bit more time and a clearer head tonight to the version of you who'll wake up tomorrow already a little behind. That handoff, repeated every evening, quietly changes what mornings tend to feel like, less like catching up, more like simply continuing. 3 items is a deliberately small number. The temptation, once this feels useful, is to prepare everything possible the night before, every decision, every contingency. That tends to collapse under its own weight within a week. 3 small things chosen consistently outlast 20 ambitious ones almost every time. 18. Own less and choose what you keep more carefully. Step into a lot of Japanese homes, especially ones lived in for decades, and you notice something. Almost every object has an actual current job. Nothing is simply sitting there for no reason. This isn't a minimalist trend being followed. It's just how people have learned to live when space has always been limited and thoughtful about what to keep. Here's the part that's easy to miss. Your mind registers every object in your visual field, even the ones you're not consciously looking at. The small pile in the corner of a room isn't neutral just because you've stopped noticing it. It's still there, still registering, still taking up a sliver of your attention every time your eyes pass over it. You don't need to clean an entire room to feel this. Pick one space, one shelf, one drawer, one corner, and remove a single thing you don't actually need from it. That's the whole habit this week. Small, but the quiet a space gives back afterward is often larger than the effort it took. This isn't a call to own nothing. It's a call to notice that ownership has a quiet, ongoing cost most people never add up. The small tax every object levies on your attention just by sitting in view, whether or not you're consciously looking at it. Fewer objects, chosen with more care, simply cost less of that attention to keep around. Notice, too, how differently a chosen object sits in a room compared to an accumulated one. The single well-loved chair, kept because it's genuinely used and genuinely liked, doesn't register the same way as the pile of things nobody quite decided about. One earns its place actively, every day. The other just happens to still be there. This matters more with age, not less. A home with decades of accumulated life in it can hold real meaning in almost everything it contains, which makes it harder, not easier, to see what's quietly become background noise. One shelf, looked at honestly, is enough to start telling the difference. 17. Care for one living thing consistently for years. A single plant tended the same way at the same time for years is a small and steady kind of relationship most households don't think of as a habit at all. Watering it, turning it toward the light, noticing when a leaf needs trimming. What makes this different from most daily tasks is its time scale. It isn't finished today. It isn't a box to check. It's a relationship that continues regardless of what kind of day you're having, and tending to it asks for nothing more than the same small attention, repeated for as long as you keep at it. There's something genuinely steadying about caring for something that measures its life in years rather than hours, a rhythm that doesn't speed up or slow down to match your mood. If you don't already have one, a single plant, kept in one place, tended on the same simple schedule, is enough to start. It also quietly resists the pace of everything else in a day. Most tasks reward speed, finish faster, move on sooner. A plant doesn't respond to urgency at all. It grows at exactly the rate it grows, regardless of how the rest of the day went, and tending to something that simply can't be rushed is its own small, repeated lesson in patience. Across years, this kind of care builds something a shorter relationship with an object never quite can. A plant that's been tended the same way for a decade carries that decade with it, visibly. In a way few other daily habits leave any physical trace of at all. It's worth choosing something genuinely easy to keep alive for this, rather than something demanding or fussy. The point isn't a display of skill. It's a small, dependable relationship that asks the same modest thing of you every day for years and gives back exactly that same steadiness in return. 16. Do something with your hands, everyday gardening, mending, folding, simple woodwork, writing something out by hand instead of typing it. Across Japanese daily life, especially among people who've kept these habits for decades, a small block of time spent doing something physical and hands-on shows up again and again. There's a real difference between passive time and hands-on time. Passive time, scrolling, watching, asks very little of you and gives back roughly the same. Hands-on time asks for actual attention and coordination, and it tends to leave you with something to show for it. A folded stack, a trimmed hedge, a page of handwriting, a finished small repair. The habit doesn't need to be elaborate. 15 minutes of something made or mended or grown by hand, most days, is enough to notice the difference between a day that passed through you and a day you actually spent doing something. There's a particular kind of satisfaction in hands-on work that screen-based activity rarely produces, no matter how engaging the screen is. A finished repair, a folded stack, a row of seedlings started. Each one is small, physical proof that the time was actually spent on something, not just passed through. That proof matters more than it might seem, especially on days that otherwise leave little to show for themselves. It doesn't need to be productive in any larger sense either. Something made purely because making it is enjoyable, with no goal beyond the doing of it, counts just as much as something useful. The hands don't distinguish between the two nearly as sharply as the mind tends to. There's real value in keeping this habit going across decades rather than treating it as a phase. Hands that stay in regular, engaged use, mending, gardening, building, tend to keep their dexterity and confidence longer than hands given nothing but screens to respond to. The habit isn't about output. It's about staying in an active relationship with what your hands can still do. 15. Walk as transportation, not as exercise. Watch people leaving a train station in Japan and you'll notice something. Almost nobody is dressed for a workout or checking a fitness tracker. They're simply walking because walking is how they get to where they're going next, the office, a shop, home. It isn't treated as exercise, it's just how the day moves. Part of this comes from how cities and neighborhoods were built. Walkable, dense, with errands naturally happening on foot rather than requiring a car for every trip. But the effect on the body and the mind is the same either way. Walking supports mood, memory, and the ability to regulate stress in a way that doesn't depend on it being labeled a workout. The shift is small. This week, swap one short drive for a walk. Not for a fitness goal, just to notice what it does to how your head feels by the time you arrive. Walking framed this way carries less pressure than walking framed as exercise. There's no pace to hit, no distance to log, no sense of falling short if today's walk is shorter or slower than yesterday's. It's simply how you got somewhere, which, oddly, tends to make it easier to keep doing than any walking routine adopted purely as a fitness goal ever is. It also changes what the walk itself feels like. A walk taken to arrive somewhere leaves room to actually notice the street, the weather, the people passed along the way. A walk taken purely for exercise tends to turn inward instead, focused on effort and pace, rather than on anything happening around it. This is also, quietly, one of the easiest habits on the whole list to keep for decades, precisely because it never depends on motivation the way a workout does. Nobody skips walking to the kitchen because they don't feel inspired today. Folding ordinary errands back into walking distance, wherever that's realistic, builds movement into a day without ever needing to talk yourself into it. 14. A simple morning stretch. Ritual for generations, radio calisthenics, a few minutes of simple guided stretching broadcast every morning has been part of daily life across Japan, especially for people who grew up with it as a fixed part of childhood and never fully let it go. It isn't intense. It isn't about performance. It's a few unhurried minutes of moving the body before the day properly begins. The value isn't in any single stretch. It's in the fact that it happens at the same time every day asking nothing more than a few minutes and a body willing to move a little before the mind takes over completely. You don't need the specific routine to get the benefit of the habit behind it. 5 minutes of simple stretching first thing before checking a phone or starting anything else is enough to give the body a small say in how the day begins. What matters most is the order, not the exact movements. The body gets consulted before the phone does, before the day's first obligation arrives. A small physical acknowledgement that you're the one waking up, not just a schedule that's about to start running. There's also something to be said for a ritual that never changes. The same handful of movements in the same order every morning for years becomes something the body can do almost without the mind's involvement at all, which is exactly what makes it sustainable long after more elaborate routines have quietly been abandoned. Consistency matters more here than intensity ever will. A gentle, unchanging 5 minutes kept up for 20 years does more for how a body moves through its later decades than an ambitious routine attempted for 3 enthusiastic weeks and then abandoned. Modest and permanent beats, impressive and temporary, in this habit more than almost any other on the list. 13. Stop eating before you're full. There is a phrase from Okinawa, one of the regions most associated with long, healthy lives in Japan. Hara Hachi, eating until you're about 80% full, not further, not a diet. A relationship with satisfaction that stops just short of maximum. A lot of modern eating isn't really driven by hunger at all. It's driven by momentum, by the plate still being in front of you, by finishing simply because there's more left. Slowing down enough to notice the point of enough takes a small, repeatable pause, partway through a meal, asking honestly whether you're still hungry or just continuing out of habit. Contentment, more often than not, arrives before the plate is empty. Most of us just move past it without noticing. The habit is simply pausing long enough to catch it. This isn't about restriction, and it isn't about leaving a meal unsatisfying. It's about recognizing that full and satisfied arrive at different points, and that most eating habits are built around chasing the first one straight past the second. Stopping closer to satisfied than to full is less a rule about food than a small daily practice in noticing enough when it actually arrives. The habit transfers surprisingly well beyond food, too. The same pause, checking whether you've reached enough before automatically continuing, applies just as naturally to a second helping of anything. Another hour of a task already finished well enough, another round of something already satisfying as it stands. Meals shared with others make this habit slightly trickier and worth naming honestly. Slowing down at a table with company sometimes runs against the pace of conversation itself. The pause doesn't need to be visible to anyone else. A single quiet check-in mid-meal is enough, whether or not the meal itself continues at its usual pace around it. 12. A slow transition ritual at the door. The entryway of a Japanese home, the Genkan, is a small specific space with one job, the transition between outside and inside. Shoes come off there deliberately, before stepping up into the rest of the home. It's a small physical ritual, but it marks something real. The world you were just in stays at the door, and the space you're stepping into is different from it. Most homes don't have this kind of clear threshold anymore. The outside world, the phone, the errands, the traffic, walks straight in with you and sits down on the couch before you've even taken off your coat. You don't need an actual Genkan to borrow the idea. A few seconds at your own front door, shoes off, one breath, a small acknowledgement that you've arrived somewhere different from where you just were, is enough to mark the transition on purpose instead of letting it happen unnoticed. Without a threshold like this, the outside world tends to walk straight through a home uninvited. The tension of traffic, the last conversation, the errand that didn't go well, all still fully present at the dinner table an hour later. A deliberate pause at the door doesn't erase any of it. It just draws a small, clear line between where you were and where you are now. The home on the other side of that line gets to stay a place of rest a little more reliably when the threshold is actually respected. Without it, the distinction between out in the world and home slowly wears away, until the two start to feel like the same continuous space with no real boundary between them at all. This habit tends to matter more, not less, on days spent mostly at home. Even without a commute to mark the transition, small outings, an errand, a visit, a walk, benefit from the same brief pause on return. The threshold isn't really about distance traveled. It's about marking that one part of the day has ended before the next one begins. 11th notice. One seasonal detail each day: cherry blossoms in spring, festivals in summer, changing color in autumn, something warm in winter. Across Japan, the seasons aren't just weather. They show up in food, in conversation, in small seasonal decorations that rotate through the year. Most of us live inside a calendar of tasks and appointments instead of inside the actual season happening right outside the window. Noticing something in the natural world, even briefly, tends to increase a sense of presence and pull attention away from the kind of looping, repetitive thinking that keeps a mind stuck in one place. It doesn't take long, it just takes actually looking. 5 quiet minutes outside each day, noticing one seasonal thing, a smell, a color, the specific temperature of the air today compared to last week, is the whole habit. Presence isn't something you find all at once. It grows through small, repeated attention. It also gives a year a shape it wouldn't otherwise have. Without noticing the seasons passing, months tend to blur into an undifferentiated stretch of tasks and appointments, marked by small, repeated attention to what's actually changing outside. A year regains its texture. Spring genuinely feels different from autumn, not just on the calendar, but in the body that's been paying attention to both. This kind of attention doesn't require any particular setting either. A single tree visible from a window, watched across a full year, offers exactly as much seasonal detail as a garden would. The same budding, the same green, the same turning color, the same bare branches, all available to whoever actually takes the 5 minutes to look. 10 down, 10 to go. And this is usually where the list stops sounding like tips and starts sounding like a description of a life you'd actually want. None of what's ahead requires more effort than what's already here. Some of it requires less. Keep going. Habit 6 is the one that tends to surprise people most because it's the only one on this list that isn't about doing anything at all. 10. Sit quietly for a few minutes each morning before the phone, before the news, before the day's first obligation, a few minutes of simply sitting without trying to accomplish anything in particular. Not a formal meditation practice, necessarily. Just a small window where nothing is being asked of you yet. Most mornings start with input, a screen, a notification, someone else's words before you've had a single one of your own. A few minutes of quiet before that starts gives the mind a chance to actually wake up on its own terms, rather than being handed its first thoughts of the day by something else. The habit doesn't require any technique. Sit somewhere ordinary for 5 minutes before reaching for the phone. That's the whole practice, and it tends to change the texture of everything that follows it that morning. The difference isn't dramatic in any single instance. It's cumulative. A day that starts with 5 unclaimed minutes tends to feel like it belongs to you a little more fully than a day that starts with someone else's news, someone else's request, or someone else's opinion arriving before you've had a single thought of your own. There's no wrong way to spend those 5 minutes either. Some mornings they're genuinely empty of thought. Other mornings a single concern surfaces and sits there, unresolved, simply being looked at, rather than acted on immediately. Both are the practice working exactly as intended. The hardest part of this habit is rarely the 5 minutes themselves. It's the pull of the phone sitting right there, already reaching for attention before it's even picked up. Leaving it in another room overnight, out of arm's reach from bed, removes the decision entirely. There's nothing to resist if it was never within reach to begin with. 9. Give one ordinary task your full attention. Consider something as simple as making a cup of tea. Now imagine doing it without a phone in hand, without 3 other things happening at once. Just making the tea and giving that one small task the whole of your attention while it happens. It sounds like nothing, but so much of modern life is spent hurrying through the exact small moments that actually make up most of a day. Giving one ordinary task real, undivided attention, instead of treating it as something to get through on the way to the next thing, tends to lower stress and produce a kind of satisfaction that has nothing to do with any reward waiting at the end of it. Pick one daily task, just one, and do it today without distraction. No phone, no background noise, no second thing happening at the same time. Peace, more often than not, isn't waiting for your life to slow down. It's already sitting inside the ordinary moments you usually rush straight through. Most days already contain several of these small, repeatable moments. Making coffee, washing a few dishes, folding a small stack of laundry. None of them require more time to do with full attention than they do while distracted. What changes isn't the duration. It's whether the moment was actually lived or just gotten through on the way to the next one. Over a lifetime, an enormous share of total waking hours is spent on exactly these small, repeated, easily overlooked tasks, treating even a handful of them as worth actual attention rather than as obstacles between you and whatever comes next, quietly changes what a very large portion of a life actually feels like to live through. It's worth resisting the urge to pick a task that's already relaxing on its own, a favorite hobby, a treat. The habit is more useful applied to something genuinely mundane, precisely because that's where most of a day actually lives and where full attention makes the biggest difference to how the day as a whole ends up feeling. 8. Write one line about the day before bed. Not a journal, not a project. One sentence most nights about something that actually happened that day, noticed, chosen, and written down before turning off the light. The habit works because it's small enough to actually keep. A full journaling practice is easy to abandon after a few weeks. One sentence is easy to keep for years, and over time, those single sentences add up to something a full page a day rarely manages, an honest, low-pressure record of what an ordinary life actually contained. Keep something by the bed, paper is enough, and write one line about today before sleep. Not a summary of the whole day, just one thing worth remembering it by. Over a year, this becomes something unexpected. 365 small, specific sentences, each one a tiny anchor into a day that would otherwise have blurred into all the others around it. Most people can't recall what a random Tuesday 8 months ago actually contained. With one line a night, that Tuesday has a sentence waiting for it. There is no need to make the sentence meaningful or well-written. A weather detail, a meal, a passing comment from someone. The ordinariness is exactly the point. Looking back at a full year of these later reads, less like a highlight reel and more like an honest, textured record of what a real life actually consisted of, day by ordinary day. 7. Reach out with real intention, not obligation. 13 down, 7 to go. And this next stretch leans a little more inward than the ones before it. Less about the space around you, more about the relationship you keep with your own mind and the people in it. It's worth slowing down slightly for these. A call or a visit made because you thought of someone specifically, not because an occasion required it, communicates something a routine check-in rarely does. It says you crossed my mind on an ordinary day for no particular reason except that you matter to me. Most contact with the people we care about runs on occasion and habit, the birthday call, the holiday message, the reply because a reply was expected. None of this is wrong, but it's a different kind of contact from the one made simply because someone came to mind and you acted on it. This week, one call or one visit, made for no scheduled reason, just because someone occurred to you and you followed through. The people on the receiving end of this kind of contact tend to remember it long after the occasion-driven ones have blurred together. It's a small habit with an outsized effect on both sides of it. For the person calling, it takes almost nothing, a few minutes, no gift to select, no occasion to plan around. For the person receiving it, it communicates something a scheduled call rarely does, that they were thought of on an ordinary day, for no reason except that they matter. Over years, this habit tends to be the one that keeps relationships genuinely current, rather than maintained purely through the handful of occasions the calendar happens to provide. A friendship or family bond checked in on regularly for no particular reason simply stays closer than one that only gets attention when an occasion demands it. 6. Accept one thing that can't be changed today. There's a concept in Japanese aesthetics called mono no aware, a gentle, bittersweet awareness of impermanence. Not sadness exactly, more like a clear-eyed tenderness toward the fact that things change, age, and end, including the things and people we love most. A lot of daily frustration comes from resisting something that was never going to be different today, a delay, a limitation, a change already made. The energy spent resisting it doesn't change the outcome. It just adds a second layer of difficulty on top of the first. The habit is simply naming. Once a day, one thing you can't change today, and consciously setting down the resistance to it, even if just for today, not giving up on it forever, just putting it down for now so it isn't carried alongside everything else. This is different from indifference, and different from forced positivity. It's a specific, honest acknowledgement. This is how things are today, whether or not I keep resisting it. Naming that out loud, even just once, tends to loosen a grip that arguing with reality silently never quite manages to. It's worth being clear about what this isn't. It isn't resignation about the things that genuinely can still be changed, worked on, or improved with real effort. It's specifically for the handful of things that are simply not available to change today, no matter how much energy gets spent wishing otherwise. A weather delay? An old decision, a limitation that isn't going anywhere this afternoon. For exactly those, setting the resistance down costs nothing and returns a surprising amount of the day back to you. 5. Practice gratitude through one small, specific gesture. Not a mental list, an actual small action, a note left for someone, a specific thank you said out loud instead of assumed, a small task done for someone else without being asked. Gratitude that stays entirely in your head rarely reaches the person it's about. Gratitude turned into one small gesture does. The habit isn't about grand gestures, it's about specificity. Thank you for making the coffee this morning. It mattered more than you know, lands completely differently than a general sense of appreciation that never gets said out loud to anyone. One small, specific gesture of gratitude aimed at one particular person once a day. It costs nothing and takes under a minute, and it tends to change how the rest of the day feels for both people in it. Specificity is what carries the weight here. A general sense of appreciation kept quietly in your own head changes nothing for the person it's about, because they never actually receive it. The same appreciation, named specifically and said out loud, becomes something they can carry with them, often for a lot longer than the minute it took to say. 4. A morning body check-in, without judgment before the day's first task, a few seconds of simply noticing how the body actually feels this morning, not evaluating it, not deciding whether that's acceptable, just registering it. Tired here, fine there, a bit stiff in one shoulder, no conclusions, just information. Most of us move through the body on autopilot until something hurts enough to demand attention. A brief, neutral check-in each morning changes that relationship slightly, not into anxious monitoring, but into simple, ordinary awareness, the same way you might glance at the weather before deciding what to wear for the day ahead. 10 seconds before getting up, noticing without judging. That's the entire habit, small enough to actually do every single day, which is the only way a habit like this ever adds up to anything. Over time, this simple noticing builds something useful, a clearer, ongoing sense of what's actually normal for your body day to day, which makes real changes, the ones worth paying attention to, much easier to notice against that baseline, instead of getting lost in the general background noise of a body nobody's been checking in with. The judgment-free part matters more than it sounds like it should. A body checked in on with a running commentary of criticism tends to get avoided rather than listened to. A body simply noticed, without a verdict attached, becomes something you're more willing to actually pay attention to again tomorrow. 3. Eat one meal a day without hurrying, not about quantity this time. That was habit 13. This is about pace. One meal a day, eaten without a screen, without rushing to the next task, without treating the meal as something to get through on the way to whatever comes after it. Most meals today are eaten in fragments of attention, a few bites while reading something, finishing while already thinking about the next task. An unhurried meal, even just one a day, gives the body time to actually register what it's eating, and gives the mind a small, genuine pause built into a day that otherwise runs from one thing straight into the next. Pick one meal. It doesn't need to be a big one, and eat it without anything else happening at the same time. Just the meal, for as long as it takes. This single unhurried meal tends to do something the rest of the day's meals don't. It becomes an actual memory, rather than a blur of bites taken between other tasks. Ask someone what they had for lunch 3 days ago while multitasking through it, and they often can't say for certain. Ask about the one meal a day eaten with full attention, and the answer tends to come immediately. It doesn't need to be an elaborate meal to work. A simple bowl, eaten slowly and without distraction, produces this effect just as reliably as an elaborate one does. The unhurried attention is doing the work here, not the complexity of what's on the plate. 2. Leave every place slightly better than you found it. In many Japanese schools, students clean their own classrooms together, not as punishment, not because someone's enforcing it, but as a small, shared, ordinary responsibility built in from an early age. No one's waiting around for someone else to handle it. Small, repeated acts like this, modest, unglamorous, done without an audience, quietly reinforce something about who you are and how you relate to shared spaces and the people in them. They're not dramatic enough to feel meaningful in the moment. Repeated for years, they add up to something that is. Today, leave your desk, your kitchen, or whatever space you're in slightly better than you found it. That's the whole habit. Nothing dramatic, just slightly better every time, wherever you happen to be. The habit isn't really about the spaces at all. It's about a small, repeated stance toward the world you move through, leaving things a little better rather than a little worse, whether or not anyone will ever notice or credit you for it. Repeated for years, that stance becomes less something you do and more something you simply are. Shared spaces, in particular, carry this well. A kitchen used by more than one person, left slightly better each time regardless of who used it last, quietly becomes a different kind of space than one where everyone assumes someone else will handle it eventually. The habit costs the person practicing it almost nothing. What it gives back to everyone who shares the space is harder to measure, but easy to notice once it's missing. 1. Choose one small habit and repeat it until it becomes who you are. This is the last one, and in a real sense, it contains all 19 before it. Your mind remembers what you repeat, not what you occasionally intend. Every habit on this list is teaching some version of the same quiet lesson in a different costume. That small actions, repeated enough times, eventually stop being actions you take and simply become who you are. There's a Japanese word for this, Kaizen, continuous, small improvement, one modest step at a time with no expectation of overnight transformation. Not a single big change. A long series of small ones repeated past the point where they still feel like effort. What makes Kaizen different from most approaches to change is exactly how unambitious it sounds in the moment. No single step is supposed to feel significant. The significance only shows up in retrospect, looking back at a version of a day, a year, a life that's quietly different from where it started, not because of one decision, but because of thousands of small ones that were never big enough to require willpower in the first place. Go back to the woman in the kitchen from the beginning of this. Her calm isn't a rare trait she happened to be born with, and it isn't extraordinary discipline either. It's the quiet result of thousands of small, completed actions, repeated so many times they stopped being decisions and simply became her. A lighter life doesn't come from removing everything at once or starting all 20 of these tomorrow morning. It comes from removing a little friction, one small habit at a time, until the way you live starts to actually feel like the way you meant to live all along. So don't try all 20 tomorrow. Pick one, just one. Do it for a week and notice what shifts. That's really the entire system, if it can even be called one. Not an overhaul, not a personality change, just one small, repeated action kept up long enough that it eventually stops feeling like effort at all and quietly becomes part of who you are instead of something you're still trying to remember to do. 20 small habits. None of them dramatic. None of them asking you to become a different person overnight. What connects all of them is something simple and easy to miss the first time through. None of this is really about the habits themselves. It's about what gets built, quietly, underneath them, one small repetition at a time. The bowl rinsed before it's set down. The one line written before sleep. The plant tended the same way for years. None of these change a life by themselves. Repeated long enough, they stop being separate habits at all and just become the shape of a calm, steady day. None of these 20 require youth or energy you no longer have, or a life radically different from the one you're already living. That's exactly why they last. A habit that depends on intensity fades the first time intensity isn't available. A habit built from something this small survives ordinary days, tired days, and the years that turn ordinary days into a life. Tell me in the comments which of these 20 stood out to you most, and which one you think would actually be hardest to keep. I'll be reading. Subscribe. Every Wednesday and Saturday, this channel goes deeper into what Japan figured out about living well. See you next week.